So hi, everybody, and welcome to the show today. I am talking with Kimberly Ann Johnson, who is the author of one of my all-time favorite books, The Fourth Trimester. I have it right here. I always say that this is a book that should just be handed to every woman as soon as they get pregnant, every person as soon as they get pregnant, because it is so packed full of such great information. And there's so much that I love about the book, but one of the things I really like about it is that so many books about having a baby are all about the baby and the baby care. And your book, Kimberly, is all about mom. I mean, you mentioned the baby, but it's mostly about mom and taking care of mom. And that is what you do. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you here and talk to you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you talk a lot in the book, and you have your own podcast, and you talk a lot about things from the perspective of the nervous system, which I love.
Yes.
So how does that play? So how does this play out and affect things? You know, I'm over here on the East Coast. So, and I always imagine California moms are a little bit more laid back. But here on the East Coast, we are, in my work as a postpartum doula, and even in my own experience, I see a lot of moms that are just new moms in a state of hypervigilance, high anxiety. You know, the sleep deprivation is accumulating, and then even moms that can't even sleep once the baby is asleep, you know, so. Yeah. Can you talk about how the nervous system plays into that in that way when you are in your fourth trimester?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are a lot of layers there. I find that there's a lot of positive things that came out of writing this book, which is really about the ways that women need to be supported when we have babies. So it's pretty straightforward. We've just done the biggest energetic transfer possible, and we've been rearranged physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. And so to expect we would just go on with, you know, life is normal afterwards is just expectations that are out of sync with what a huge life transition it is. And then our culture is kind of set up we value so much productivity, and we value so much the rational, logical, that becomes what's safe. And so a schedule is safe, a routine is safe, you know, predictability is safe. And that's all the things that don't happen when you have a baby, because babies you know, my favorite thing to tell people lately, even just friends, is like, we're not robots, we're people. So I can't give you 5 steps to your best business right now, because you're a person and it changes and our babies change. But the hypervigilance, you know, and high anxiety, and now, you know, because really the only way that we know, you know, everyone thinks they're doing women a big favor by expanding mental health diagnoses postpartum. So now it's like, oh, I didn't know I was depressed because I actually felt anxious and da. I heard someone, it's like the big D, you know, and people are like, oh, I didn't have postpartum because, you know, or I had postpartum with my first and not the second. It's like, no, you had postpartum with every birth you've ever had.
Right.
And miscarriage and abortion and adoption. And what's really important is to know that there is a huge shift. And so that's normal. So it's normal to feel uncomfortable. It's normal to feel incompetent. It's normal to feel like you're in the middle of a river and you've got nothing to hang on to. And that doesn't mean it feels good. But if we know that that's normal, that already takes a layer of stress away.
Right.
Because the actual it ends up being called a condition or whatever, like the feeling state of anxiousness is amplified when we think we're doing something wrong.
Yes.
And from a nervous system perspective, that's our social nervous system. So our social nervous system is when we look at other beings and we see them through our eyes, we see them through the turning of our head, we hear them through the tone of their voice. That's what's telling us that we're safe and that things are okay. And so that's why in the 5 universal needs that I lay out in my book, the presence of wise women is one of those 5 needs, because we need other women around who've walked the path before us to soothe us, and to listen to us, to mirror us, to provide some containment, but also to share their experience, to share. And, I always say we've monetized all of these roles. I've been talking to some friends who are pregnant, about to have babies. I've given a couple sessions, and they're women that are deeply embodied, that have long-time spiritual practices, and they're worried that they're like, I just didn't feel like getting a doula. And I'm like, yeah, because you have 5 friends you could call who can serve as a doula.
Right.
And that's how this used to be. It's just that now this is all monetized. So now, I always say that with breastfeeding, if I lived around my aunts, I have 3 aunts that had 3 children each. And actually I have 4 aunts that had 3 kids each. So that's 12 kids that they nursed. And so I would have had the benefit of and the wisdom of 12 different babies who had 12 different situations. Mm-hmm. Instead, I was walking back and forth to a milk bank with a torn pelvic floor, talking to random nurses, trying to get help to understand, do I have enough milk? Is it problem? Is it stress? Is it a latch? Is it this? Is it that? And we see this so much with new moms where they're actually pathologizing the baby. And they're saying, my baby's so fussy, and my baby's got a lip tie, and my baby this. And it's like, well, actually, if your nervous system was regulated, your baby would actually be fine. Your baby's reflecting your nervous system to you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I want to go on 7 different tangents now, but that is such a great answer. And it's the same thing I say all the time. As a postpartum doula, so often I see moms, I'll go to their house for their first visit, and they are, explaining everything that's going on. And when I say, oh, that's all fine, and this is all normal, you can see their shoulders relax and the relief sweep over their face. And I always say, sometimes just one visit can be so beneficial and just play out for weeks and weeks, the benefits of that. But I
totally agree. And I tell everyone, because people say, oh, well, postpartum doula, I don't have the money for that, and that's a specialty service, and da-da-da-da. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you don't have the money for someone to come 6 days a week.
Right.
But could you do 1 day a week for 3 hours? And you and I can talk some other time, but I would bet 6 figures that if we did a study and we had a control group, and we had one group that has a visit 3 hours a week only for 6 weeks, so that's only 18 hours, and one that doesn't, we would see, that person would have better mental health for sure. I just finished teaching a course called Mother Circle, and I teach 8 classes, and we go from mother rites of passage, mother body, mothering self, mother birth. We do a birth story renegotiation, mother sexuality, mother lover, so mother relationship. If everyone had that class, we wouldn't even have postpartum depression. It wouldn't exist, right? Because people would just hear, oh, it's an archetypal journey. I'm in the underworld. This is normal. This is what happens,
right?
And then when that other people, it's people say, oh yeah, misery loves company, but it's really not that. It's that we're sharing a very specific human experience that is a total transformation and rite of passage. And we need witnessing for that.
And you're not meant to do that transition in isolation, which so many moms do now. And like you were saying, it didn't used to be that way. and my favorite description of postpartum doulas is that we are the women of the village helping the women of the village. And it's just like, yes, you didn't used to need to go take a breastfeeding class or a mommy and me yoga class or hire a postpartum doula. Like, it was just built into your village, your cul-de-sac, your tribe. You just, like you said, we're surrounded by women, and now we just don't have that. And so I feel like that's the thing that's giving new moms anxiety and these feelings.
Right. Well, and how long has it been? I went to college in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think we had Google yet.
No.
So, now it's like, this is a very short period of time when our nervous systems haven't evolved to be able to handle the amount and capacity of information. And what do new moms do when they've got, they're nursing and there's a problem? They go down the Google rabbit hole, which is like the worst place to go forget it with prolapse, the worst place to go. And so what I was starting to say earlier was like, on the one hand, my book has developed all this awareness. On the other hand, it's contributed to paranoia for some people, where people are calling me 10 days postpartum, like, I think I have a prolapse. And it's like, look, lay down. Like, we're not even close to a stage to be able to evaluate that.
Right.
Like, and because the anxiety is an internal state that looks for information, because all of the way the nervous system works is whatever our internal state is, our mind will captivate information to confirm that internal state. So if you're already feeling anxious, then you're going to be like, oh, I think my cervix is a little bit lower. Oh, I think this. Oh, I think that. And attach to certain pieces of information that then we spin about.
Yeah. And I wish that something that backs that up.
Yeah, Google that and then find a whole, freaking Facebook group with thousands of women reinforcing the story, right?
Right.
I mean, they don't like it in those prolapse groups. They don't like you to say anything that would suggest that you could heal that. They only like stories about surgery, and like, it's not a solution-based situation. And that's what I'm really finding about, it's so wonderful that in the last couple of years, motherhood has come way forward in terms of people talking about it. Women really, so many great books have been written in the last couple of years. And what's also happened is we live in a culture right now at a moment where it's like the race to the victim position. So this thing like sleep deprivation, I'm like, I really don't think it helps you to quantify how little sleep you're getting. People have been doing this since the beginning of time. We know how to operate on little sleep. We know how some people intentionally go sit all night and take ayahuasca and don't sleep. Like, we used to have sex all night and not sleep. Like, we know how to not get sleep and function. Does it feel good? No. Does it feel destabilizing? Yes. But we can do it.
Yeah.
And making it into this, like, I don't think that having all these discrete categories, like, what is it? It's new mothering. New mothering includes not getting a lot of sleep. Right. New mothering includes feeling like you don't really know about where your boundary ends and where your baby begins. New mothering means, wow, how does my relationship shift? What's the family unit? I mean, all that's just a part of it, but we don't have to make that a big problem and act like that somehow our partners could even possibly take up half of that. They can't, unless they were the one that physically birthed the kid.
Right. And the problem is really, like, all that you described is normal. The problem is when you're trying to live in our patriarchal society and not sleep and, not have time off or be back to work at 6 weeks. And don't even get me started on, like, competing on social media with getting your body back and losing the weight. Like,
for sure. And I think that this is, and this is what Rochelle Garcia Saliga has done such a great job contextualizing in all of her work. But it's because mothering and how we mother is so intricately linked to the body itself, is so intricately linked to the earth, that it is really, we could call mothers the canaries in the coal mine, showing us what's out of order in our culture. Mm-hmm. So do I feel terrible that some people are going back to work? I mean, I've served people 2 weeks postpartum, you know, and if you're a freelancer, you have to be even more ferocious about carving out that time, right? I mean, at freelancer, it's like, oh, well, maybe I'll just check my emails, you know, 2 days postpartum. Maybe I'll just work this much, you know. I have a friend who runs a doula agency, and her first birth post-birth, she went back to work at 2 weeks. She does placenta encapsulation. She got Hashimoto's. She had to completely reparent her whole gut and health and thyroid. And so the second time around, she's called it aggressive savings. She started saving aggressively, which meant like, we'll just cook stuff that's in the pantry sometimes, and instead of like, you know, going to the grocery store. And she had people, I think she called it something that was really awesome. It was like, do you want to contribute to my like fluffy nest or something like that? Yeah. And so people could contribute to that.
Oh, awesome.
And, you know, it's not going to get handed to us.
Right.
Yes. Some of the laws are going to change, not fast enough. Some corporations are going to get on board. Some aren't. Right. And that is why this period of time asks us to make some radical decisions and you know, and do we have to give up things sometimes? Definitely.
Right.
You know, like, do we have to lose out of, and it's just, and I'm not talking about, you know, there are people that are just in abject poverty, and they're going to work at 2 weeks because they're going to work and stand up at McDonald's. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. And that's probably not the majority of the audience. I think we can all agree that but what is within, we make all kinds of contracts with ourselves about what we permit ourselves to do and not permit ourselves to do. And some of it's based on, well, if I don't work, then I'm going to get behind on my 401k, or if I don't work, then I'm going to lose ground here, or how many people have time off and they don't take it?
Oh my gosh. Right.
Because they're like, oh, my colleagues haven't taken it. I had a woman radiologist as a client, and she was like, the male radiologist, she did one of those things where she would read x-rays overnight.
Oh yeah.
And the male radiologist, they were fine with her taking time off, but she's like, there was somebody else in my office who was pregnant and she didn't take time, so I shouldn't take time. I'm just like, no, we can't be competing with each other for how little time we take off. Right. We should be congratulating each other for paving the way to, you know, and everybody knows, but it's true. In Canada, people get a year paid. In Sweden, the mom and the dad each get a year.
I have a friend who's actually Swedish, and she was saying, even though they get a year, a lot of women don't take it because they don't want to lose their position in the company, even though legally they can't.
Yeah.
They feel like they have to get back at 8 months. I mean, 8 months is still great, but I just,
well, I think it's important to say those realistic things, though, because people talk about this with pelvic floor health in France too. They're like, all women in France get 6 pelvic floor rehab, and then you talk to a French woman and they're like, well, it's not exactly like that. We mythologize these places where it seems to be better, but some of them it really is. You know, like most Scandinavian countries, you get over 6 months.
Oh yeah.
Holland, you get like 4 months. But that doesn't change that those women are also under the influence of the question that we as modern women have, which is where our value lies and how we can possibly do everything, which we can't, and how we navigate those seasons of life. Because we can rail against it shouldn't be this way and we should have paid childcare and all that stuff. But we're a long way from that. I mean, maybe not. Maybe we'll be super surprised in this next election and things will get done faster. But it really, I think of it as an inner job, you know, to the extent that we have that. Because if we those 6 weeks, if those 6 weeks were a full lie-in, that transition would be radically different. Right. I don't really like when people have, let's say, 4 months off. Mm-hmm. Then I always tell them to go back to work at 3 months, but to just dose it out. So titrate it. So go back to work at 3 months and go one day the first time, and then 2 days. Because for the mom and the baby to go from all together all the time to 9 hours apart is like talk about a nervous system jolt. Right. I mean, that is like all of the hormonal priming is just, you're just going to get such a steep drop there.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So what do you know, this is like something I struggle with all the time, is like, how do we express to women, people that are pregnant, like, here's what you have to do. You need this personal responsibility to set this postpartum period up for yourself. But it's, you know, I joke about it all the time. Like, people are like, well, that's not going to happen to me, or I don't need that, or I'll be fine. I'll push through, and I, you know, I can do it. It's like, it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been through it yet, just how massive the transition is.
Yeah. It's not only hard, it's maybe impossible.
Yeah.
Because there's some part of our evolution that doesn't even allow us beyond the birth threshold. So I mean, the majority of postpartum doulas, if they're working for a first-time mom, it's because that person got in deep water and then hired them at 2 weeks postpartum or something,
yes,
right? They waited until something got bad and then they called. But the second-time moms, they're just like, sign me up.
Yes.
You know, and which is great, because the amazing thing, you know, a lot of people listen to what I say and they feel bad and they feel like, oh my God, I didn't do any of those things. Is my cervix going to fall out when I'm 50, you know? And it's like, I didn't do any of them either. That's why I wrote the book, and I'm doing great. You know, I have an 11-year-old. I have a fully functional body on every level. I have sex when I want to. I exercise when I want to, and I'm fully recovered. It just took me a long time, and it would have taken a lot shorter had I known what I know now, which is why I shared it with the world.
Right.
There's no way to convince someone, because, you know the deal too. You're like, what's your postpartum plan? And people are like, my husband has 10 days off work. You're like, that's fantastic. And what's your postpartum plan?
Right.
Because your husband's not a postpartum plan.
What they've done, like, to a room.
Right. Which is, you know, typical of our culture, right?
Exactly.
You're just like, oh, you have a baby shower to honor the baby, and then part of the preparation is getting the room ready. And to be honest, that's actually totally legitimate. I mean, I was on the complete other spectrum of magical thinking, where I was like, I don't need anything. I just need my breasts in a sling and I'm good to go. So I was very underprepared.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is people think that is preparation, and it's one level of preparation, but another level of preparation is this adjustment and a priming, allowing for space for this huge shift that's going to happen. And because most Americans just run for their lives from any kind of dissent, it's just like, let me just try to and we can. That's the crazy thing about our culture, is like, we can troubleshoot so many things. I mean, I lived in Brazil for 8 years. You go to the bank, that could take you anywhere from half hour to 4 hours. And there's nothing you can do about it. You just sit your ass there and wait in that hot line.
Yeah. And
then watch people go back and forth on their lunch break. But when we, here we can really control so much. And so, I've had people say, this whole giving birth thing, I mean, it doesn't make any sense why you can't just schedule it like you schedule a wedding. And I'm like, it's not really analogous here.
Right.
Like, I don't even want to know how your sex life is, but it's just really important that, there's no way we can convince anyone, but it's just, there's no exception. Like, every woman needs, it doesn't have anything to do with if you're strong, weak, fat, short, big, tall. Every woman needs the same things to recover from birth, all over the world, everywhere. And in the cultures that respect it, they know those things and they provide those things. Mm-hmm. So no one's special enough or strong enough or in good enough shape or of sound enough mind to escape the fact that that's a huge physiological transition.
Right. And yet no one, your OB isn't talking about it. Like, it's just crazy.
Right. Well, even leaving the hospital, people, the staff, don't always know people will say, oh, well, is there anything I should know? And they're like, oh no, just don't drive home, but take it easy, or listen to your body. And I mean, that's what a lot of yoga teachers say. People come to class 2 weeks postpartum and say, well, what should I do? And the teachers are like, well, take care of yourself. And it's like, well, but we don't even know remotely what that means when we're so altered.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Can you talk a little bit about switching gears a little bit, but like, Eastern, in the Eastern cultures that really do like take the 40 days of lying in and have, certain recipes and soups and kind of like protocols for a new mom.
Yeah.
That's kind of coming from a place of like, you need to do this now to protect your health.
Longevity. Yeah.
Longevity. So can you talk about like what you see in women that don't take that time? And you kind of already covered it, but like talking about like here in America, like your friend you mentioned that had Hashimoto's, like when we don't take time to heal.
I mean, really everything, because there's some people that have pelvic floor problems like incontinence or prolapse or pain during sex or hemorrhoids. And some of them are caused during the birth, but some of them are caused during poor recovery. So if you're back up in gravity, you already have elastinous connective tissue, and you're walking around, then maybe you get a cough, like you're likely to get a prolapse. And the prolapse isn't from the birth. The prolapse is because you were walking around, maybe walking up and down a ladder, carrying a toddler, whatever. And people are like, but I'm not weak. Like, I'm not a convalescent. And it's like, you are not weak, but your body is weakened. Your system is weakened. And that's what's understood, in Indian medicine and Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. They believe like we're vulnerable between seasons. So when it's switching from summer to fall, you're likely to be more vulnerable to something. And so you change the way that you eat and you change the way that you dress based on that. And this is the same thing. Postpartum is a season of life. And so you dress warmly, even if it's hot where you are. And you make sure that you don't expose behind the nape of your neck and your lower back. And you wrap yourself, because the wrapping has a physical and physiological buttressing effect, but it's also containing the wind and the emptiness and helping a woman psychologically by feeling that they can feel the contour of their belly and of their body. So these are somatic practices. And I mean, I see people who come to me 6 months postpartum and they were fine, 6 weeks postpartum, but then they started running and then they throw their back out or they sprain this because their pelvic floor, their whole core apparatus isn't in alignment yet. And they're not ready to do that kind of compressive exercise. Or it's not, sure, breastfeeding is challenging, but the amount of challenges that women are having with breastfeeding, that's not normal. That's showing us that there's something that's out of alignment. And so much worry, if you've had a medicalized birth, that's going to impact. If you've had Pitocin, that impacts breastfeeding. If you've had a surgical delivery, that impacts breastfeeding. And just a real disconnect between how a birth happens and then how we are afterwards. Our birth affects our postpartum time, which is why, I've developed these meditations on birth that needs healing. And I studied with Pam England, birth story medicine, and I'm a student of somatic experiencing and a practitioner. So I do these renegotiations because there's so much that happens in a birth that gets deeply embedded in our nervous systems and influences how we go forward in our marriage, in our relationship with our child. It's really moving, actually. I mean, when I wrote the book, when you write a book, you write like so many drafts. It's really crazy. I mean, I was one of those people in school that I could just write one thing and I would get a good grade. So I was a poor editor. And then it was very humbling. But so anyway, I wrote my own birth story, the birth story of my daughter, like 5 times. And you think you've written it already, like writing it again, whatever. But every single time it would be like, there would be a new revelation there of like, wow, that was the core wound. And that's where that came from. And I think the last time that I wrote it, I recognized that there was a certain moment in my birth in her birth, where I had no one there. So I was just moving towards transition, and the midwife had left, and my parents had left, and her dad had left. And I was really angry, but I didn't know that I was angry because I was internalizing the anger. And I just said to myself, okay, forget it. I don't need anyone else. I'm doing this all myself, and it's me and you against the world. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I knew I wasn't totally alone because she was there with me. But moving forward through our lives together so far, it's really been that way. It's been like her and I against the world. And it's been very hard to separate our dyad and allow other people into it. And also, there's something very wonderful that I'm her anchor, and that, right, you know, through many countries and continents, we've been the stable thing for each other. But at the same time, it's also important for her to know that there's God or spirit or something else that's also a solid foundation, and that she has other pillars of support. So it's really important for people to acknowledge, you know, if you had a surgical birth, if you had forceps, vacuum extraction, if there was a way that things went in your birth that were not what you wanted or didn't expect, that there's material there that needs to get processed, that needs to have a landing place. Sometimes just talking about it works. Usually talking about it with someone who's skilled at somatics is most helpful, so that you can
explain what somatics is to people that don't know.
Yeah. So somatic work is really knowing that our minds and our bodies are often telling two different stories. Mm-hmm. And that the body tells the story that doesn't lie. So our bodies are infinitely trustworthy. Again, although not comfortable, mm-hmm, they're giving us information about things that have not been completed and that are really asking for our attention and asking for our completion. So like a lot of people say, oh, well, I'll go get that whole incontinence thing worked out after I have the money, or after I get a job, or after I do this. And it's like, well, actually working with that might be the thing that allows you to get a job, might makes the thing that allows you to have that conversation. Because our body is giving us so many clues about our story. You know, I think Carolyn May said our biology is our biography. Mm-hmm. And so especially in the postpartum time, it's a time when everything that's been unresolved rises to the surface. Yeah. And there's a lot of beauty in that, because that's what maturation is. And to become a mother, we need to mature, and we need to loosen our hold on what we thought beauty was, what we thought presentability was, what we thought good was. And we get to become more real, right? We get to become more ourselves, more unadorned, more
authentic.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ripe opportunities there.
Yeah, I love that. So what would you say to a woman who's listening, a person who's listening who is in that space? She's got a 2-month-old baby. Her nervous system is out of whack. Like, what is the first step? Like, where can she find would you say your meditations are a great place to start?
Yeah, so I did a meditation series with Expectful. They do pregnancy meditations, but they're doing a postpartum library. So I developed a series of meditations with them called Birth That Needs Healing, mm-hmm, or How to Heal from a Difficult Birth, one of those two. My book also takes you through some of that. Mm-hmm. But I would, get support, mm-hmm, you know, make an effort. And then there's a lot of practitioners now. I mean, for new moms, I think it is helpful. I'm more and more trying to find my way to in-person gatherings again, because my animal body is just not being completely met by everything being virtual. But in the case of a new mom, I would prefer that women who are under 4 weeks postpartum don't leave their house.
Yeah.
So you can have a somatic session with someone over Skype.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have lots of practitioners that I recommend to do virtual work. Pam England, the founder of Birthing from Within herself, does virtual work. So
yeah, that's true. That's amazing. I think that is one benefit of technology because, you know, when you live in a big city or like here on one of either coast, like there are a lot of practitioners, but if you're, you know, out in the country, in the Midwest or the South, like there's not, you can't go to the city and
right.
find all these resources that you need.
Right. The Mother Circle is a great resource. There are some Facebook groups online that I know. There's one called Millionaire Single Mom, and that I know that people feel comfortable sharing stories. But I would say that if you're dealing with a lot of anxiety postpartum, and you know, there's can be a lot of shame about that because sometimes the partners are like, you're healthy, the baby's healthy, everything's good, we're good, you know, and those things very much are true. You may need to, maybe it's the birth, maybe it's the tongue tie revision you did afterwards, maybe it's something else, but you just might need some space holding to be able to, because anxiety is in general an unprocessed flight response. So flight lives in the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, and when we are not resourced, it could end up as freeze, right? So in freeze is an immobility or helplessness. And if you've had any anesthetic, that's a forced freeze state in your body because you can't move your body.
Right.
And so that might call up earlier freeze responses. And then that causes a revved engine that doesn't have any place to discharge.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it requires being able to have someone else around to help you. I also have a card deck. It's not out yet. It's coming out in November. It's a fourth trimester cards. So it's based on the book. There's 20% new material in it. And there are some meditations and guided things that are in the deck.
Yeah.
So you could just pick that up and read something and it will take you through it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That reminds me, I work with so many moms that feel like they're struggling because they can't exercise. Like running used to be their outlet to release that steam or,
totally.
Hot yoga or whatever. And now they can't. And that
totally. But this is what I'm saying is all of these ways we used to regulate ourselves, which were actually just running was really our anti-anxietal. And yes, I know that that's healthier in some ways than taking a pill, but still it's showing us our underlying patterning. I mean, I was in the same situation. I used to use yoga and meditation to get myself calibrated, and then I was injured. And every time I did yoga, I actually injured myself more. It made me worse. And then I'm like, okay, I don't have any tools in my toolkit to deal with this emotional state. And I also don't even have, I have no one around to talk to. And when am I supposed to deal with my emotions? And I felt bad because I'm like, I don't want to just cry around my baby all the time. Right. So it's a real thing, but it's also, again, it's giving us an opportunity. I call it, because my favorite Pema Chodron book is Wisdom of No Escape. And motherhood is like the actual no escape. Like before that, you're just pretending. You're like, I just have to sit on this cushion. But really, you can fucking get up whenever you want. But, you want the real no escape is, you got to poop, but if you get your baby off your breast, they're going to wake up and then you're pulling your pants down and trying, that's the no escape. And that's the tenderizing process. But that's imbuing in us the qualities of perseverance and unconditional love and patience that we're supposed to be engendering, not just for ourselves, but for the planet.
Right.
We're not doing this work just so that we can be the best parent to this one kid. That's way too small for what the endeavor is. It's like we are getting tenderized so that we can turn that in towards ourselves, so that we can feel that level of compassion for ourselves. And then we can also bring that out to the larger world.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah. I was laughing because I remember saying I did my yoga teacher training my youngest, I think, was 2 years old, and I had 3 kids. And I remember just, learning all this stuff. And I remember like saying to my teacher, like, yes, of course these men could go meditate in caves all day or for 3 years. Like, I'm trying to just get through the day with 3 toddlers. Like,
not to mention, I'm like, at this point in my life, I'm like, send me to the cave. That shit sounds easy. Like, Vipassana sit, that used to sound hard. Now I'm like, come try to take care of my 11-year-old. Like, we'll trade. I'll go sit for 10 days and get meals made for me.
Yes.
And you come to my house.
Right. Yes, it's so true. So can you tell us, like, since you've written the Fourth Trimester book, now you're kind of on a new, I don't want to say new path, but tell us what you're working on now. I love the activate your inner jaguar stuff that you've been doing. So tell us.
Yeah. So when I wrote the first book, and then I was in this incredible incubator for about 3 years, but because, when you write a book, you finish it and then it comes out like 15 months later. So, I worked on like 800 women, and I do hands-on, hands-in pelvic floor work. So I got kind of this intensive in what's really going on with women and what's really going on in their pelvises. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that and my own nervous system training, I realized, okay, I want to be able to talk to all women about what is going on with, like, essentially the Me Too movement. Because when that started, I was like, okay, there's an element of this that's amazing. There's an element of it that's unshaming. There's an element of it that's like, no more, things need to change. We're not going to accept this power dynamic as it's been. And there was also an element of it which was very, there was a lot of victimhood in it. Yeah. And that's important, because if you've been in denial and you never recognize that one thing that happened was actually abuse, and it wasn't just like a bad day, or it wasn't just a well-meaning uncle, it's important to claim, yeah, I was a victim. This happened to me. And then the next stage is survivor. I survived that. I'm not a victim to that anymore. I am a protagonist of my experience, and I've processed this to the point that I'm moving forward. But there's even something that's beyond that, which I call jaguar, which is when you are no longer defined in relationship to your wounding. So you can be fully present. You can trust your bodily instincts. You have a felt sense in your nervous system that's trustworthy, so that when you say no to your kid, when they're putting their hand down your shirt and grabbing your boob, and you don't want them to be pinching your nipples, they listen to you the first time. Yeah. That when you're in the street, you're not cowering because you don't want, or you're not dressing in a certain way because you don't want a catcall. You're owning yourself the way that you want to be, however that is, and that you can stand in that. So I'm not suggesting that we can avoid any kind of abuse, but I am suggesting that 90% of the time we're in gray area. And I know that because I heard so many stories that was like, oh yeah, I did have an intuition, but I was trying to be nice, or I didn't want to offend anyone. Or in my case, I was sexually assaulted in college. And at the moment just before the assault was going to happen, it was constructed over an evening. There were so many times when I tried to get out. But when I say try, it was like, I could have just left, but I didn't leave because I was like, oh, but my friends like him and he's this person, and I'm sure I'm misinterpreting. And then by the time we got to the dorm, it was like I was making up lies. So I was like, but I couldn't just say, like, get the fuck away from me.
Right.
Leave.
Yeah.
So I was the whole time in the appeasement, and questioning myself. Maybe he does have better intentions. Maybe this, maybe that. And then I didn't yell because I didn't want anyone to walk in, because I didn't want to be seen in that position.
Right.
So the jaguar work is really what my experience in session was that when I would say to women, because when you work with somatics, you work through the body. So I would say, okay, we're going to be a wolf and a rabbit. And I would assume because they were coming to me because they had birth trauma or because they had a sexual boundary rupture, that they would want to be the wolf. So I'd say, you be the wolf and I'll be the rabbit. And I'd be like, we're at the watering hole. No one gets eaten at the watering hole. And then they would begin to act like the rabbit without wanting to, because the suggestion of being the wolf would take them into rabbit. They couldn't occupy the role of the predator. And so I realized, oh, from a nervous system perspective, full nervous system health looks like we can occupy all of the phases. So sexually, that means you can be the initiator and you can be the surrendered. It means you can be the one, you can receive an invitation and you can extend an invitation. And in life, it means, you know, you can be in the driver's seat and you can be in the passenger seat, and you can be both of those roles or all of them in between. And so I realized, oh, I have to teach women how to be the jaguar, because it's these incomplete sympathetic responses. It's all the things that you couldn't say, the ways you couldn't move or didn't move, places that you didn't escape, that is stuck and it's occupying. It's either in freeze, so that every time our husband looks at us with the look, we like want to leave and don't know how to express what it is that we do want. Or when the doctor says, I'm going to break your waters, you just go along with it. All of the different ways that is in our lives. And so that's what the next book is about.
Oh, that's awesome. And when is that book due to come out? Do you know yet?
You'll have to be patient. January of 2021.
Oh, wow.
But I teach the class 3 times a year. So it's a 6-week class, and the book is based on the class. I teach it live. I teach all my classes live. And so I do group facilitation in the process of the class.
Oh, awesome. And so people can find all this at your Magamama, how do you say it? Magamama website?
Yeah, magamama.com, magamama.com.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful to so many people. So thank you so much for taking the time.